Hi there, guys. This is a quick, hopefully, tutorial on how to get these kind of results from Blender using FlipFluids, and I use ManuelLab for my humanoid with BVH file for the animation. And this is just going to be a quick run through of how to achieve that the way I did. Um, You can use the Blender internal fluid simulator. It's not very reliable. So this is just going to be they're much the same. All of the controls are quite similar. So I'm just going to stick with FlipFluids because it behaves itself more. Um, as regards the character is made using ManuelLab, which is an add-on here for um, Blender 2.79. I think there's a 2.8 version, but I believe the developer discontinued his part in the project in November. I understand some people have taken it over and are trying to get it back on its feet. So you can look it up, Manuel Bastioni Lab. It's up here in the corner. I'm not going to go through how to install it or anything like that. You can find all that information on YouTube. This is just what I use for my dancing character in inverted commas. So, yeah, so let's get stuck in. Okay, so the first thing is let's set up the character. So this character in this example is going to be our inflow object, our faucet. So the character will be where the water or the fluid will be coming from. Um, So, just if you don't know fluid simulations, a quick overview of the terms you need to know for this anyway. You need your domain, which is essentially your fish tank container for the water. So, this is the Blender internal is here. But I'm going to use FlipFluids here. It's not it's paid. It's like $60 or something like that, but it's worth it. It's good fun. I tested the beta version when they were looking for testers, and I thought it was fun. So I got the full version, and it's awesome. So if you're into that kind of thing, it's much more reliable and trustworthy, and I think less power sapping. I'm not sure, but it seems to work better for me. So your domain object is always going to be a cuboid. It can be taller or longer, but the resolution of the fluid simulation will depend on the longest side. Um, so that becomes your essentially the container for the fluid, which is why all my fluid sims have the square edge. It's how fluid sims are done inside Blender. So that's our domain object, and our inflow object or our faucet or tap object is going to be let's go with let's go with elf. We don't need cycles materials because we won't be seeing the shaders on the skin, so there's no need for that. So you get a basic character. You can change, all of the parameters here. Random generator. You can change character age or mass or tone, muscle tone, all that. I'm just going to skip straight to finalize. I'm going to uncheck this. Again, I'm not going to go too much into why I'm doing what I'm doing here. There's plenty of tutorials on how to use Manuel Bastioni Lab out there, if you can find a copy of the lab itself. So I'm basically just setting this guy up to be set for animation. I'm then going to use a BVH file, which is a motion capture file that I got from I'll put a link in the description. It's a DAS friendly BVH release of the Carnegie Mellon Graphics Lab motion capture database. So it's a huge set of free professionally captured human motions using motion capture software rather than animated. And there's like 145 of the files here. I just downloaded 10, and there was some good kind of movement-based dancey ones in there. So that's what I'm using for that. I'll put all the details up on screen anyway. So we have our elf, and we want to go pose and animation, load animation, and then we're going to pick one of these. Doesn't really matter. Now you'll notice when it loads that some of the joints and bones are a little screwed up, like the ankles here on the feet. They're a little bit messed up, but I don't worry too much about that, as he's going to be made out of fluid, so that won't be apparent. So I'm not too worried on that respect. This, I think, is it's like a capoeira move or a breakdance move or something like that. Some sort of little movementy move. Okay, that's fine. Also, if you're doing it this way, I recommend to take off as many modifiers as you can without losing. So I get rid of the displacement modifier, the subdivision modifier, and the corrective smooth modifier, because all I need is the armature to move the mesh around, as the fluid won't be high resolution enough to really make any difference with those modifiers on, and it will just choke the system up. So yeah, so we have our animation. We're gonna set the fluid domain to the correct point in the animation, so just scale that. Check all the angles. Make sure he's always in the box. Now what you can do to help the simulation run a little quicker is to take any to reduce the size of the domain in any way you can. So he's not going up too high, I don't think. There's nothing over this line here at any point. Just here. So I'm gonna reduce this down a little bit. And like I said, I'm not really this is my first tutorial, so I'm not really going to go too much into how to do all of the little bits. It's more just about the fluid sim general overview. So there's a little bit of craziness on this guy's neck at the end of the animation here, but again, that's not really going to matter too much. Okay, so let's just save that. Right, so we have our domain around the edge here. We have our what will become our, so down here in the physics tab, I'm again going to go into FlipFluid, and this time I'm going to choose inflow. So this just basically sets our mesh up to be the faucet, like I said, the tap for the scene. Now, excuse me. So domain, our fish tank, inflow, our faucet. So when we run the simulation, this is going to play through the animation and run fluid off. I'm going to run this at so I'll go through the settings here just quite quickly in case you do decide to go for FlipFluid. The settings that I know of anyway. So this is our main grid resolution here. So the longest side of our cube will be split into 65 sections, and then it will correspond across the grid, and that will be the grid resolution of the water. So you want to get this as high as you can. I've got a pretty decent, I'm rocking a Ryzen Z5, or yeah, I think it's Z5, maybe Z7. I'm not 100% sure. It's it's a pretty decent processor, and I mean, if I push past 150 or 175 resolution, it really can take a long time. So I don't push the boat out. I try and achieve a little bit more smoothness when I bring it back into materials after it's baked. Uh, so that's our grid resolution. Let's put this at 80. Um, Frame rate, I just leave that be with these animations because they generally come in at that. Fluid display settings. This is, I suppose, if you, I always have them both set to final. If you have this set to preview, then you'll see a low resolution fluid in the thing, and then this will display in the render. But I always keep this set to final unless I have this one set incredibly high. White water, we're not using any of that. That's more internal stuff. This is just kind of smoothness and surface mesh, so I generally tend to turn these up for these kind of things. I'm not going to go into it too much. This is just an overview. World. Okay, so enable world scaling. This means we can set what size the domain is in real world terms, and therefore achieve a more realistic kind of splashing effect. So if if he's 2 meters tall, then the longest side on this is going to be maybe 3 meters. So that's correct. It says here 3.2 meters. So we'll just set this to 3.2. Actually, we can just, I will set it to 3.2 because gravity is our normal gravity. Viscosity makes the fluid viscous like honey or caramel or stuff like that. But it, again, slows down the baking process. So unless you really need it, I generally tend to leave it off. Fluid presets. FlipFluids have a lot of kind of preset settings for different things: wax, red wine, orange juice, ocean, milk, caramel, blood, beer, all that kind of stuff. I don't use them that often because it's more fun to just play around with the settings. Flip materials just allows you to quickly use any of the materials for the fluid. Advanced settings. We've no obstacles in the scene, so there's no major issue here. Okay. Also, sorry, in the inflow settings for your animated mesh, your faucet, so to speak, I would always check add object velocity to inflow. That means like if he moves his arms or his legs, that's going to kind of add a little bit of force to the inflow. So that's the kind of effect that I like, so I always go for that. I would always switch this to deformable because it's a deformable mesh. Constrained fluid velocity. All of these have little tooltips if you hover, but constrained fluid velocity basically just means that if he's emitting water from his feet while the water level is at his knees, it will continue to push the water around underneath. It's much more realistic, so again I tend to go with that. And export animated mesh, because our character has an armature and isn't just a keyframed object or an F-curved object. We need to click this as well just for that little bit of extra accuracy. So that's the inflow settings. We've done the domain settings, and that's basically it. You just click bake. You will need, depending on the length and the resolution that you render it at, you'll need, I'll bake this out now and we'll see what kind of time we have for baking. So it's running through the animate, it's passing the animation data through the fluid simulator first, so it has a handle on where everything's going to be going and being emitted from. So it'll run through this, and I'm guessing at 80 for 205 frames. This bake will probably take 10 minutes on my system, so you can check down here at the bottom when it eventually stops choking. And Okay, baking in progress, initializing. So, and the nice thing about the FlipFluids is it lets you kind of click around through the menus. It bakes the fluid in the background, so you can continue, you can go in and change your materials in some other section of your scene, or you can, it's not that sensitive to you doing other bits and pieces. It just kind of works away in the background and doesn't freeze the screen out. So once you see baking in progress here, you can go down the bottom here and it tells you the overall size of your output mesh data, um, which is always good to keep an eye on, because I always have fuck all space on my system because I'm terrible at filing and throwing away stuff. So this is chugging through here, 38, 39 frames. I'm gonna speed this through the process. If you want to look at how it's doing, maybe if it's not doing so well, so you can go to your start frame there, click on your timeline there anywhere you want, and you can see already here we've got some fluid and it's all working perfectly fine. And that's essentially, that's the first section of it. You find a nice balance between, high resolution 80 to, I usually go anything less than 80. If your character isn't moving around very much, isn't taking up much real estate in the domain, you can reduce the domain substantially, and that will allow you to up your resolution and kind of work the payoff that way. But if your character is, running over 10 square meters, you're going to really have to choose between like even a medium resolution will choke your system up if the domain is huge, because the character has to cover all that space, so it's not really allowing for a large kind of grid resolution size. So keep the domain as small as you can. But again, this is just a nice little effect, so I'm not too worried about, seeing the edges of the domain or the water splash against it or anything like that. So this is tipping away nicely there. It's on frame 97. You can, like I said, it's nice with FlipFluids. You can just kind of look through your simulation, and when it gets to the point where it isn't actually done yet, like we get up to frame, you'll see here it'll run after frame 104, it'll run dead, and you'll see our character again. But that's fine, you just go back and it'll catch back up with itself. Was there anything else while that is rendering out that I had to mention? Set up of the character. Yeah, like I say, it's, you can use Make Human as another character creation thing that I think is still on the go. Daz 3D, although I've never used it, I believe it's a similar setup. I see another thing called Poser, not 100% sure. I think that's the same kind of dealio. But you can use anything. You could just animate a cube moving across, and that would operate as your tap. You could use any number of ways to trigger the fluid. I just happen to use Manuel Bastioni, so you can check that out if you can find it. It's absolutely awesome. It's a shame that he decided that it wasn't worth continuing anymore, but that's the way she goes. So then there was setting up the fluid sim. We covered domain, which is our box around the edge. We covered inflow. Sorry if I'm not doing this, is still tipping away over here, so I don't want to, as you can see there, we can still click on through it. We covered the settings that were necessary. Okay, so when this is finished baking, the problem is there is a version of FlipFluids available for 2.8 and therefore Eevee, but I found that it likes to crash almost every time when rendering a fluid simulation that was baked in 2.8. I believe it's a bug and that they're trying their best to fix it, obviously, because that's what they do. But the workaround I've found for it is to set up your fluid simulation in 2.79 which I prefer to do anyway because my Manuel Bastioni version is for 2.79. Also 2.79 is stable, so it's stable, which is, it's not going to crash in the middle of a sim. Then when it's baked, I will export it to Alembic file format, which is some form of mesh data. I'm not 100% sure. You can look up what Alembic is. It's a recent addition to Blender, recent enough, I think. And it's great for importing and exporting high density meshes and such, I believe. That's what I use it for. So I'll be exporting the domain once the bake is finished, which it almost is, into the Alembic file format. And that's going to be pretty big. That generally comes out at double the size of your mesh data. So if this comes in at 1 gig, then the Alembic will be 2.5 or thereabouts. So you just want to have a little bit of floaty space on your drive. But you probably will, because I am useless. So we're nearly there with this. So, and we'll be doing export shortly. Okay. Right. Like I said, guys, this is my first tutorial, so you're going to have to bear with me. I know I'm probably not doing enough movement on the old screenaroo here, but like I said, it's working away, and we'll get back to it now. Okay, so let's save this. Right, we have our fluid sim, all of our frames are there. It's all looking peachy, but we don't want to render it in cycles because that would take forever for just what is essentially just a little, a nice little effect for an Instagram video or Facebook video or something like that. Just an animation test. You don't want to spend 15 hours rendering it. So I'll take it across and render it in Eevee. And I will do that by using Alembic export. Now, before we do this, there's a bug in the Alembic exporter. Something I found out the hard way after about 6 hours of trying to get it to export. And then I just actually did 2 minutes of research and figured out what the problem is. So I'm not sure what the bug is, but the solution to the bug is to put a dead modifier on the fluid surface. So not the domain, make sure the fluid surface is selected. And then you're going to put a smooth modifier. And what I mean by dead modifier is we just turn the repeat down to 0. So it's having no effect at all on the mesh. But for some reason, the presence of it there helps the Alembic exporter to export correctly. So our next step after that is to click the domain, just the domain, depending if you want other things exported as well, but for this effect you don't need to click fluid surface. So we're going to go to File, Export, Alembic, this one here, .abc. You may need to, I don't think you do need to enable the add-on in the preferences, but click on this. We get some options here at the side. We have, I don't use any of these. It automatically sets the frames. I'm happy enough with that. I always set it to selected objects only, and then I unclick hair and particles. You will need the particles clicked if you're running a whitewater simulation in Flip, because that involves particles, but for this it's just mesh data. All the others are fine here. Into my passport and export Alembic. Now this will take a little while, purely because this one's not too bad. I've had some long ones, half an hour, 40 minutes Alembic export, but you will see. Okay, so let's just wait for that to complete. Boom. So our Alembic is exported. I would always save. That's a given. So that is us done in 2.79 if you choose to do it that way. Like I said, it might work for you to just bake the fluid sim in 2.8 and render in Eevee. It doesn't work for me on my current version of 2.8 or either the current version of FlipFluids, but it's fine. I like the workaround. It's much more stable, and it's easier to control it in 2.8 when it's mesh data like that rather than the internal workings of a baked fluid simulation. So we're going to close out of 2.79 and we're going to open up 2.8. So let me just stop this. Find Blender 2.8. Hopefully I can cut this down a little bit. It seems like it's running a little long for me, but like I said, it's my first tutorial. First one. Let me know what you think. It might be bullshit. Okay. We are back and into Blender 2.8. So we just straight in, just gonna go File, Import, Alembic, ABC here. So it's import this time. We go to our source location, we go Tut. For some reason it comes up red, I just click it anyway. Import Alembic. There's our cube that was our domain, so we can hide both of these for that. So it just makes it disappear, and here is our, just hit play. Now it will slow down a little in the frame rate, but nowhere near as much as the baked version would have to play through in Thingy. So that's all functioning nice and fine and good and fine. We'll set up a quick camera. Like I said, guys, this isn't, I'm not going to go through all the little odds and ends and things that I'm doing. I'm assuming anyone who's looking at this tutorial has a basic grasp on Blender. Where am I? Right, so next things next. We're going to want to change our render engine from Cycles, because fuck that shit, to Eevee. Which again isn't, you know, it's not Cycles, but it's quick, and sometimes quick is better. So down here we have our different views here. I'm going to switch on a few settings, just basic stuff. I always turn on screen space reflections because I use reflective materials, and it's nice to have them at least react slightly better. Ambient occlusion as well, sometimes bloom, but it can be a little overpowering for these kind of fast moving fluid sims when the light catches the water, and you don't want to lose the focus of your focal point on just a little splashy wave over here. So I generally go weak or leave it off. Again, I'm assuming you know what, there's plenty of tutorials on what this stuff is. Shadows, soft shadows, again, it's entirely up to yourself. It's in Eevee, that's the main thing. Okay, so I'm going to switch to rendered view. Now, you can see it's a bit grey, so we'll switch our world to black. Now it's dark as fuck. So we'll take our lamp. I have a lamp in my scene by default. If you don't, again, you don't need me to tell you this. So we'll take this point lamp and we'll stick it over here. Let's move it a little, give it a bit of edge light. Now, also for all these lamps, you want to go into your properties, object data, click the shadow tab, and click contact shadows. It'll just leave it a little bit better setup for you. Change one of the lights to a bluish. Turn off the overlay. Again, this is all taste. After the bake, it's on the import, it's just set up the lights how you like and set up the materials how you like. I'm going to shift D this lamp over to here, move it out a little bit, give it a little bit more front light, and change the color to a nice orange. Then I'm going to click in to our fluid surface, give it a new material. I'm not going to flip around with the material too much. let's just have a look, see what it looks like. Well, there you go. The effect is working, you know. Now we do have some gnarliness here. I'm not sure what's that from. Probably just a little thing with the contact shadows there, but yeah, it is. Let me turn off. Contact shadows on that one. Yeah, it's just like I said, it's with me anyway, it's always trial and error. But that's essentially the ins and outs. You've got your lights set up, you've got your camera set up, you've got your fluid sim running with a material on it. Next thing to do is choose a location. So let's call this tutorial. I'm going to change this to MPEG. Click encoding. I always change this to MPEG 4. It's just what I prefer. Perceptually lossless. You can go higher if you want, but it's only a short little video. No audio on this. That's the output settings done. Yeah. And then just Control and F12 to render an animation. And it will render out the animation thusly. So I'll switch back to the Blender main screen. Okay. So that is how you achieve these kind of things. I hope that wasn't too long-winded, and I hope I covered everything all right. Like I said, it's my first proper tutorial, and I wasn't really down for going in for an hour and a half to explain the ins and outs of the Manuel Bastioni or anything like that too much. You can find all these things. I'll put links in the description as much as I can do to anything that's still around, or even a sniff of the Manuel Bastioni Lab for 2.8. Like I said, FlipFluids is class. I just use this method because it's more stable than risking it in 2.8 and then being left pulling my hair out because it keeps crashing. This is a way that will work every time. So I hope that was. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. I hope I didn't balls it up. Let me know what you think, and hopefully I'll be doing some more tutorials. See you again. Have a good one.
I blindly